Back when I was 19, I had a dream that firmly planted the idea in my head that we are actually living in a shoddily designed simulation. I remembered that this happened on my 19th birthday. Actually, well, the first part did. The second part was about a month or so later. On the night of my 19th birthday, I had the weirdest dream I have ever had. It was probably the most realistic dream that I've ever experienced, to the point where it felt like I was honestly lucid dreaming. Though this was a long time before I even knew what that meant. In this dream, I remember walking down the street, and I recall that my mind was set on going to the grocery store to get a bag of coffee, something that's not really me. I'm not huge on coffee, honestly. Anyways, I was walking with my earphones in, and a song I really liked came on. I turned my phone up because I was really feeling it, and I remember that I couldn't hear anything around me. I got to the corner where I had to cross to get to the store, and I remember I was standing there waiting for the light to change. I remember that I wasn't the only one waiting for the light to change. There was also another guy standing there with me. For some reason, what he was wearing stood out to me vividly in the dream. It was a sweatshirt that was orange, and it looked like it was covered in paint stains. I recall that the logo on the top right said something like Cooper Interiors. After a few minutes, it swapped over to the walk sign, and I started into the crosswalk. I stepped into the road with a bit of haste. I remember that I was just really focused on the beat of the song. Then after a few steps, I remember seeing a car coming at me at a ridiculously high speed. Something about that moment felt like it was in slow motion. I remember looking at the car, at the driver as he barreled in my direction. I remember looking to my left and seeing the guy in the orange sweatshirt looking at me with terror on his face. I remember seeing the police officers in their cars behind the first driver. It was like I was being given several moments extra to take in the entire scene around me and take in the details. Saturday, around noon, guy in the orange interior design sweatshirt, the specific song, and me standing in the middle of the crosswalk on the street next to the grocery store. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the ground and feeling cold throughout my body, staring up at a slightly overcast sky. I remember feeling dizzy and not being able to move. Then I recall the guy in the orange sweatshirt running over to me and the sound of sirens near me. Then I woke up covered in sweat and freaking out mentally. That dream legit felt like it had happened in real life, almost to the point where I want to believe that I actually died and essentially loaded a save file or something like that. Anyways, on to the really freaky part. A couple months later, after I had this dream, I was at home and talking with my girlfriend on the phone, and she mentioned that she had just bought some sort of pumpkin spice coffee and that she really liked it. She was saying that it was the best coffee that she had ever had and that I needed to try it. I relented and told her that I would go sometime and get some. She told me that I needed to go now and get it, otherwise I never would. She knew I didn't really like coffee, And honestly, she was right. I sighed and said fine, then told her I would call her back when I got home. I threw on my jacket and put in my headphones, ready to walk to the store. You probably know where this is going. I was walking down the street with my mind dead set on getting this dumb pumpkin spice coffee to make my girlfriend happy. I knew I was most likely not going to like it, but it was for her, so I needed to do it. Near the corner where I would need to cross, one of my favorite songs came on, and something about it felt different, like I was really feeling it. It felt like I hadn't listened to it for years, and it just randomly came on. I reached for the volume button to turn it up, but paused. It was at this moment that the dream came back to me. The song was the same, the street was the same, the plan was the same. There was only one thing that was out of place: the guy on the corner. There was still a guy standing there. He was still wearing a paint-stained sweatshirt, and it still said Cooper Interiors. But it wasn't orange. It was a really pale blue. I was just standing there and staring at the light, waiting for it to change and thinking about how that dream went. I pulled my earphones out for a moment and just kind of stood there. Within seconds, I heard police sirens heading in that direction quickly. The light changes over to walk, and at that moment, I felt strange. I got that cold feeling all over again that I had in the dream, almost like it was reminding me what would happen if I did walk. I just stood there and waited for a few seconds, waiting for the car to zoom down the road at full speed. Sure enough, it did. That car with that driver being followed by that exact police officer. All of them blasted through the light and past both myself and the guy in the sweatshirt. After they passed, the guy next to me chuckled and looked over at me. He said something like, "Dang, good thing you took your earphones out when you did, huh?" I actually laughed and nodded, kind of in awe that this whole situation played out in front of me. That's pretty much it. I dreamed the situation, and it almost played out in front of me. Part of me thinks that it was either a prophetic dream where I was given a heads up, or it was another timeline with a perfect storm set up. The only difference in this situation was the color of the sweatshirt, and maybe that was the only thing that needed to be different for this all to unfold in a new way. Also, if anyone wants to know, I didn't like the coffee and ended up giving the rest to my girlfriend. This is probably the only glitch event that I've ever experienced, and it was one that was really, really strange to me. It's one of those things that honestly keeps me up at night sometimes, and it starts to bother me more than it should. Or maybe the fact that this happened and I can't forget it is a form of glitch in and of itself. Or maybe it's not a glitch and just something that happened. But honestly, it doesn't really feel like a coincidence as much as something being broken in reality. It was a couple years ago, I think back in the summer of 2018. My wife and I had a few days off work together, and we decided that we should go see her grandparents on the other end of the state. It's one of those drives that you can do in one go and not stop for anything other than gas, around 9 to 10 hours, if you really have the willpower to do so. That said, my wife doesn't have the willpower for long drives, so we had to stop at least once during the drive. She's looking at maps on her phone and she sees that there's a gas station / convenience store a couple exits ahead and asks if we can stop. I, of course, agree, and we plan on getting off at the next exit. We make the exit and pull up to the gas station, and she tells me that she'll be right back. I decided to get out and walk around the car to stretch my legs and fill the tank preemptively. I'm watching the numbers roll on the pump and waiting for her to get back. After a few moments of waiting, I get back in the car and am waiting impatiently. Then she comes out and has a look of shock or confusion on her face. I was just thinking that maybe there was a weirdo in there or something, and then she gets in the car and tells me that the strangest thing just happened. I ask her what, and she tells me that the clerk in the station looked like my long-lost brother. I laughed at her and said, "Oh, really?" But the look on her face was dead serious. She wasn't joking. I started to brush it off, thinking that maybe we just kind of looked similar, only to have her tell me again that this guy looked like an identical twin. Obviously, this piqued my interest, so I parked and we got out of the car to go inside. I opened the door and stepped in. The clerk looked up to greet us as we entered, but he paused halfway through his sentence. I think he was going through the same weird feeling I was going through. We both kind of stood there staring at each other awkwardly for a few seconds. I will tell you that she was right. This guy looked exactly like me, down to the minute details. I have longer black hair. His hair was literally the same length as mine and same color. He had dark green eyes that were the exact same as mine. He even had a small scar on his chin like I do, on the same side and damn near an identical length. He was the same height, same weight, same everything. It was honestly creepy as hell to me to be looking at someone that was basically a clone of myself. I really wasn't sure what to do, so I stepped up and awkwardly introduced myself. I told him that my wife had told me that there was a guy in the store that looked like me, but honestly, I didn't expect this. They weren't super busy, so we spent a bit of time chatting about things, and it all just kept getting weirder and weirder with every new detail. My name is Derek. His name was Eric. We were both named after our fathers. My mother's name was Anna, and his mother's name was Hannah. Both of our mothers passed away when we were kids. We were both born in March of 1996. I was born the 4th, he was born the 14th. The more we talked about things, the more it felt like he and I were identical twins, except he was from a different state altogether and had moved to that area with his girlfriend only a few months prior. We grew up in 2 totally different states, but honestly looked like we were related. Now, I know that this may be a coincidence, like I said, But the fact that I would pull into this specific gas station at this time during an impromptu road trip to my wife's grandparents' house across the state and run into someone that looked like they were basically a clone of myself just feels astronomical, like nearly impossible. Hopefully, I run into him again. We didn't exchange phone numbers or details or anything like that. We just kind of reveled in the moment and decided to move on. If we never run into each other again, I just hope he's doing well. So, I have a glitch story that some could look at and equate as a potential false memory, or something that my brain just made up when I was younger. But I've always had a fantastic memory, and I know for a fact that all of this happened how I remember it. On top of that, and something that I find interesting, every single time I try to think about this or tell this story to someone, I start to get this weird feeling that I'm about to have a panic attack, which almost feels as if the Matrix, or whatever it is that controls our simulated reality, is trying to get me to forget the old timeline and accept this new one. That said, I remember all of this as it actually happened, and I refuse to be pushed into some alternative timeline that isn't true. This happened back when I was 12, which was about 10 years ago. Now, I know that some of you may say, you were a kid, so you probably just don't remember it, right? But I promise you that I remember all of this very vividly in an intricate detail. At this point, my family lived in a small house in Missouri. I'm not going to say where specifically for security reasons. It was just myself, my parents, and my brother, and we were fairly separated from most of our family, with the exception of our aunt on our mother's side. The start of this whole event happened when my paternal grandmother passed away. It was the end of June, and my brother and I were out of school for the summer when my parents got a call. Apparently, my grandmother had died unexpectedly and suddenly in her sleep, and my grandfather was trying to figure out everything in a panic. The problem was that, as stated, his only son, my father, lived in Missouri, and they lived in upstate New York. At this point, my dad makes a firm decision that he needs to fly up north to help his father take care of everything, and my mom says she's going to go with him, as he would need the emotional support. It was decided that my brother and I would stay with my aunt in St. Louis while my parents flew out to New York to take care of my grandfather and my grandmother's affairs. Here's what I remember happening. I remember my aunt coming to get my brother and I. I remember loading my stuff into the car alongside my brother, and I remember telling my parents goodbye. I specifically remember telling my parents that I hoped they enjoyed New York. I remember this because it was something stupid to say. They were going for a funeral. They weren't going to enjoy it at all. Anyways, after that, I remember getting in the car with my aunt, and as we were driving, my aunt tells us that we were going to go to Six Flags during the week we were staying there. I remember being incredibly excited for it, And I remember the two of us genuinely having an amazing time with my aunt and uncle, going on all the rides, and that I specifically loved the roller coasters. Overall, it was probably the best week of my childhood. We got to spend time with my aunt and uncle. They didn't have kids, so they spoiled us. We got to go to Six Flags and really just had a great week that summer. When we got home, my parents were already back at the house, and I know I've said this a few times, but I specifically remember that my father gave me a snow globe that had the skyline of New York. This globe was absolutely gorgeous, and that I genuinely loved everything about it. It was one of my prized possessions as a child, and I kept it on a shelf. I never really touched it, but I always knew it was there, and I genuinely loved it. Now, here's where the glitch, or timeline shift, or whatever occurs. When I hit 19, I was ready to move out of the house and into my own apartment. A friend of mine and I had saved up the money to pay what we needed. We both had a steady job for our age, and we were excited to move forward with our lives. When I was packing up my room and boxing away all my stuff, I got to the point where I was clearing off my shelf, and I paused. There were various little knickknacks, items, trophies from school, but no snow globe. I just kind of sat there and stared for a moment, trying to think about where I could have put what I considered to be one of my most cherished items as a child. I called my mom into my room, and I asked her if she or Dad had moved my snow globe to another shelf in the house, or if they had seen it. My mom then asks me what snow globe I'm talking about. I tell her the one that she and Dad got me from when they went to New York. My mother just stares at me confused and says that she and Dad had never been to New York. When she said this, I started to feel incredibly strange inside, almost like that panic attack feeling I mentioned before. I stepped down from the ladder and tried to ask if she was feeling okay and if she had forgotten when the two of them went to New York when Grandma died. She again asked what I was talking about. I called my dad into the room and tried to talk to him about it, and he was just as confused, saying they never went to New York ever. I tell them that when I was 12, Grandma passed away, and Grandpa was panicking because he didn't know what to do. I said that the two of them flew to New York to help him out, and my aunt came to get my brother and I, and we stayed with her in St. Louis, and that we all went to Six Flags while we were there. Then it got even more confusing. My dad's face twisted into genuine confusion, and he said, "Yes, when you were 12, my mother passed away unexpectedly, but they lived in Chicago. We drove you to your aunt's house on the way there. She didn't come and get you." So now, with this said, I live in a timeline where my grandparents lived in Chicago and not New York. In this timeline, my aunt also didn't come get us. My parents supposedly drove us to St. Louis on their way to Chicago. They never brought back a snow globe, and they drove. They didn't fly. I don't understand how any of this is possible when I have a very vivid memory of the situation, and I recall having that snow globe my entire childhood. What's really weird is that I cannot recall the last time I actually saw the snow globe, and I'm struggling to remember anything past getting it and putting it on my shelf. And every time I think about it, the memories are foggy and I start to get that anxious feeling. Like I said, I know this may be incredibly mundane to others, but to me, it's one of the creepiest things that has ever happened. This story isn't too terribly eventful, but it's still one of those stories that comes up between my mother and I because of how weird it is. This happened somewhere around a year ago, back when I was 17. My mother and I were driving around on a Saturday doing various errands and all when my mom says that she wants to stop and get coffee. We head to the nearest Starbucks and decide to go in to get our coffee. It was a nice day out, so why not? We get in and order, and my mom goes to pay with her phone, but then realizes that she left it in the car and that she has to go get it. I tell her not to worry. I have the app on my phone too. I pay for our coffee. I get a free one. No big deal. Everything goes like normal. We go sit down and wait for a few moments. They called my name and I went up to the counter to get the drinks when I noticed that my drink was incorrect. I inform the barista and he apologizes and says he will remake it really quick. I agree and decide that I'm going to stay up at the counter while he does so I don't have to go sit back down and come back up. I know, lazy. I motion to my mom from across the Starbucks that it'll be another moment, and she looks like she understands. Then, after a couple of seconds, I feel my phone vibrate in my pocket. I pull it out, and it says that my mom is calling me. I glance up to look over, and my mom is sitting at the table, cleaning her glasses. I look back at my phone and, yep, it definitely says that the person calling me is my mother. I kind of laughed at first, thinking she must have pocket dialed me, so I decided I'm going to answer it. I swipe and put it up to my ear, expecting to hear rustling in the ambience of Starbucks. But when I answer, it sounds like someone is crunching paper in front of the microphone. I could hear a strange sound in the background of the static. It was kind of like that tone you get when you turn a radio dial really slow and the channels that are out of range try to fade in and out. That really strange, high-pitched sound. I was genuinely confused. I said hello to see if somehow my phone had picked up someone else's call or something. After a few more seconds of static, I could hear the voice come in a bit clearer, but the only thing I heard it say was, "Do you want to get coffee?" It almost sounded like the conversation we had had just before we decided to get Starbucks. Like it was recorded and being played back into my ear through a radio or tape player or something like that. After a couple more seconds, the call just sort of fades out and then ends. I stare at my phone in confusion, but in the end, I just shove it in my pocket and grab our drinks. I get back to the table and I mention to my mom that I think she somehow pocket dialed me. She then reminds me that she left her phone in the car. That's why I had to pay. something I had somehow immediately forgotten. This just made the whole situation weirder. I show her my recent calls, and it shows that I did, in fact, receive a call from her, and it lasted 46 seconds. We take our coffee and head out to the car. Lo and behold, her phone is sitting on her dash clip in plain view. She checks it when we get in, and much to both of our surprise, her recent calls shows that her phone did have an outbound call to my phone at the same time. There was no one else in the car. Her doors were locked, and there was no way someone would have broken in, grabbed her phone, called me, played back a recorded conversation, then hung up and locked the doors again. Honestly, neither of us have any explanation as to how this happened, but part of me thinks it was some sort of alternate dimension or alternate timeline call, one where I hadn't gone with her to run errands, and she called me asking if I wanted to get coffee.